because Donald Trump and Joe Biden are all but set to secure their respective parties' nominations and face off in November for the presidency. Both candidates swept up the delegates during Super Tuesday. Any hope that a moderate Republican could beat Trump has now been extinguished, as his nearest rival, the former South Carolina governor, Nikki Haley, dropped out. Trump leads over Biden by a few percentage points, but the big question is whether he can maintain this lead and how many never-Trump moderate Republicans will suck it up and vote for him instead of Biden. Let's turn to the former White House chief strategist and host at the War Room, Steve Bannon. Steve, first question, I guess a fairly obvious one. Is this it now? Is it definitely going to be Trump versus Biden?
Yes, I think it's been that for a while, Andrew, but it's solidified now. So it's the general campaign will start tomorrow night with the State of the Union address, and I'm sure President Trump's going to have a strong counter for that, but it's game on right now.
Now, you told me last time we spoke that there would be about 3,000 specially trained people coming into Washington after a Trump victory. And I wonder whether this is simply going to make the presidency a branch of MAGA, Make America Great Again, and whether there are any countervailing forces, any checks, any balances, in your view, under a Trump presidency.
Well, there will be checks and balances. Let's go back to 3,000. Every president, Joe Biden gets it. Barack Obama gets it. We basically have 4,000 political appointees that go into the apparatus, the administrative state. I think in England you only have 100, but we have 4,000 that control essentially 2 million federal employees, but also 18 million contractors. Remember, we have a $7 trillion budget, including a $1 trillion defense budget every year. So those 3,000 are the ones that don't have to be Senate confirmed. They can go day one. They're being trained up now. I mean, we're ready to hit the beach, to form a beachhead, and to take over the administrative state. The second Trump term is going to be much more aggressive, just like his run right now is much more aggressive than it was in 15 and in 16. He's much more aggressive. I think he has a steep learning curve. He understands who his enemies are in Washington, D.C., and, people are getting ready for this. And as we said, he had to chop a little wood to get through this, but last night was an absolute nationwide blowout. And so the Trump MAGA movement is ready. New York Times, everybody surrendered today. Mitch McConnell bend the knee to Donald Trump. So we've said this from day one. We were going to win and win big, and President Trump did.
This is warrior fighting talk. You say more extreme, more aggressive. Let me ask you about, for instance, the policy of banning visitors to America from a fair number of Muslim countries. Why would that be a good idea?
Andrew, I was one of the architects of that with Stephen Miller. Remember, that was still, with all the hoopla that went on, that it wasn't about Muslim countries. It was a travel ban on countries we were very concerned about. Did they have the right procedures to process people with social media and interviews, et cetera, that we wouldn't allow terrorists in our country? Remember, President Trump, in those 4 years, with all the big hoo-ha that went on, it withstood constitutional check. The Supreme Court approved it. The Supreme Court said it was fine. And we never had a terrorist attack in all 4 years. And so I think you'll see more policies like that. I think particularly on deportations, President Trump's going to be very aggressive. We've had 10 million illegal alien invaders in our country since Biden took the presidency, and there's going to be mass deportations starting very soon into President Trump's second term.
Steve, they're migrants or immigrants. They're not invaders.
That's how we totally disagree. We have a very set asylum structure. These people have not followed the asylum structure. The NGOs that support them, the source-backed entities that support these, we've done 3 or 4 years of reporting from the Darien Gap all the way in Central America. This is an invasion of our country by the illegitimate Biden regime. Those 10 million illegal alien invaders that did not follow anything on asylum. Remember, in our country, you can't be an economic migrant and get asylum. Also, if you want asylum, you have to go to the first country that's free to apply for asylum. And we have a Remain in Mexico policy, and we have a policy that you can't have any burden on state finances. None of that was followed. Biden and his regime they planned, executed, and exacerbated an invasion of the country. Those 10 million illegal alien invaders are going to leave.
That repeated use of the word alien and what Donald Trump said about race and blood will sound to many people.
Andrew, that is a technical. If you look at law in the United States, illegal alien.
You don't mean it in a racial sense. You don't mean it in a racial sense.
It's a legal term. It's illegal in our country. if you're in our country and do not go through the national immigration system, you're
Right.
deferred to in law as an illegal alien.
Now, listen, Steve, I must ask you, we were all transfixed by seeing Liz Truss, our former Prime Minister, with you on your TV show. And I just want to ask you, first of all, what you made of her, because she's not very popular. Her ratings are very, very low because there's a sense that she bust the economy. And yet I get the sense you regard her as a bit of a heroine.
Well, no, actually, on the show when it happened, we used to beat her up quite a bit, very much about what you were just talking in your last segment. We were sitting there saying, how can you have tax cuts when you haven't put forward the projections? I came out of Goldman Sachs. I said, you failed to put forward your projections. You had a tax cut that I don't see how it pays for itself. More importantly, you haven't sold people on how it's going to pay for itself. The bond vigilantes, she's quite important. She's the first, I think, major figure of political leader in the West to be turfed out by the bond vigilantes. And this is going to be something in the future. So what I knew about her, I was not particularly impressed because we used to beat her up pretty much on the show. I will tell you, I thought she had some very interesting things to say in her book about this convergence of the Bank of England, of your financial institutions in the City of London, and also the administrative state in England that I think really requires a quite deep dive and investigation on. We have the same issue here with our central bank, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, and the lords of easy money on Wall Street, who really, to a large extent, control our country. So I think what Liz Truss is on is quite interesting. I didn't really see that in action, and I was probably tougher on her than any other media figure in the world when she was prime minister.
Since that encounter, we've had the Rochdale by-election. And you were talking to her about it, and you were saying that you're going to see a radical Islamist elected. If you were talking about George Galloway, that's exactly what happened. But I'm really quite interested in George Galloway because there has been a newspaper report that when the two of you were both in Kazakhstan and you heard that Theresa May had resigned, you actually embraced. And I wonder if there's an element to which the radical left and the radical right meet over some of these issues.
What I think you're seeing is the radical left in the radical Islamists, Sharia supremacists. We call it the red-green axis meeting, and I think Galloway's perfect. Look, I think he's absolutely
I don't think, by the way, that he's a radical Islamist. He's definitely on the hard left.
Yeah, I actually think he's a supporter. I actually think he may be a supporter of Sharia supremacism. That'll be seen over time. He's absolutely brilliant, a great orator.
He would deny that. I mean, we would be absolutely clear. He would deny that.
I had a great bit of fun with him. I think he's absolutely brilliant. I think it's quite scary that someone that's even I would say more anti-Semitic than the Labour Party is now sitting in Commons. And
again, he would deny that. I have to be careful here, Steve Bannon. He would deny that fiercely.
I agree. But we just had this happen in Michigan. Remember, the state of Michigan is absolutely central to the Democratic Party. For maybe your listeners haven't followed, in the primary last week, Biden had 100,000 votes that really voted against him from the Arab American community and the Muslim community that are adamantly against what's happening in Gaza and think his policies have been terrible. They also had a very low turnout. And on the university campus at the University of Michigan, which was one of our most prominent public colleges, 35% of the students and the faculty voted for what they called non-committed, which was really an anti-Biden vote. This situation that you're seeing in England all the time, it's now really raising its head in the United States. It's going to be a big political issue for us going forward.
Okay, let's just one other very big issue, I guess, here is looking at the polls. We've had the budget here today. The Conservatives here appear to be in very, very difficult straits for the next election, very likely to lose. What's the Trump campaign view of Keir Starmer and the Labour leadership now?
I've always been very impressed with Sir Keir. I'm not a Labour guy by a long shot, but I've always been very impressed with him. I think, on the other hand, the Tories, I would equate the Tories to where the Republican Party was before Donald Trump came on the scene. Remember, MAGA is a populist nationalist movement. We're much more nationalistic. We're much more America first, American citizen, and we're very populist. We can't stand and hate the elites that have allowed the decline of our country, the managed decline of our country. I believe the Tories are essentially where the Republican Party was before Trump. And I think the Tory Party is going to, as you see it today, will essentially collapse at the next election and be rebuilt, I think, with a populist, with people like Nigel Farage and others who are populist nationalists. That's how you'll rebuild the Tory Party to be really something that can compete with Labour.
populist nationalism coming. Steve Bannon, thanks very much indeed for talking to LBC. And I should emphasise that some of the things that Steve Bannon there was saying about George Galloway are fiercely denied by him, and that we have absolutely no evidence for them. Now then, whilst Biden has swept up the delegates on Super Tuesday, many Democrats are concerned that the perception that his administration hasn't done enough to rein in Israel's military operation in Gaza will boost a Trump campaign and hand the former president the keys to the White House. One of these is the Democratic presidential candidate and co-host and founder of the Young Turks news channel, Cenk Uygur, who joins me now. Cenk, very good to talk to you. Can I ask you, first of all, to explain to people listening what your version of the Democrat ideology is? What kind of Democrat are you?
Yeah, I'm what I would call is a relatively new category, which is a progressive populist. And so what that means is we largely agree with Bernie Sanders, but some of the progressives in America have gone in a direction that is not that helpful electorally, strategically, and ideologically. So they're being associated with some of the rise in crime, immigration, et cetera. And I don't agree with their policies on that stuff. Well, our positions are economically populist. And so even if you look at my website, cenkforamerica.com, you'll see that my top 10 priorities poll, all of them, poll above 2/3 of the country. So the entire country actually agrees with us. But there's one thing that in America we don't talk about at all in mainstream media, which is the radical corporatists. And so those are the people that are actually in charge of our government. They make up the great majority of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. They're totally radical. They do not agree with the American people on almost any issue, but they reign supreme because of money and power.
And it's pretty clear after Super Tuesday that Joe Biden is going to be your candidate. It is going to be Biden versus Trump, as we, I guess, always thought. One thing that really interests me about the Biden message is that this has clearly been one of the most, as it were, left-wing Democratic presidents of all, certainly when it comes to economic policy, and he's had a lot of success when it comes to jobs and the Anti-Inflation Act and so on, and yet he doesn't seem to be getting that message across to blue-collar or red state America at all. Why not?
So there's two excellent reasons why. One, you know already, he is one of the worst communicators in American political history. And he was already a terrible campaigner. He's been handed everything he's ever gotten in his life. So, for example, he won the presidency how? He came in 4th and 5th in the first two contests. He's a miserable politician. The only reason he won is because Barack Obama, James Clyburn, Pelosi, Schumer, et cetera, the entire Democratic leadership rallied every single Democrat, and let's be honest, every single member of the media to say that Bernie Sanders shouldn't win. He's terrible. He's a radical. They call his supporters brown shirts, insanity like that. MSNBC pretended he was going to execute people in Central Park. So that the election was completely handed to Joe Biden, and then he barely won. In the Electoral College, he only won by 43,000 votes in 3 swing states. So the reason he can't get his message out is because he's not good at this. So, for example, if I was president and I had the same results that he did, every day I'd do a press conference and I'd say, lowest unemployment we've ever had. Look, I'm sorry, I don't want to seem like I'm bragging, but literally no one has ever done better. So if we were talking about employment, I'm the best there is. Inflation, I would compare it to the inflation in the rest of the world and brag about how we're doing so much better than the rest of the world. But Joe Biden is not capable of any of this. He doesn't even know how to form sentences that help his campaign. He's just awful at this. But number two, there's a giant disconnect, which is based on policy and perception. So when Biden delivered 15% of his agenda, people that are in power thought, oh my God, I didn't want much change at all. And he gave us this amazing amount of change, 15% more than we already had. We love this status quo. Now it's a little bit better. Joe Biden's the greatest president ever. But for most people in America, they are not among the elites. So they look at that and go, you didn't deliver on 85% of your agenda, and I needed so much more change. So I'm sorry, but you were a failure. And that's a disconnect.
And Cenk, very quickly, in a word, can he win?
No.
All right. Cenk, a very, very interesting perspective we haven't heard so far on LBC. So thanks very much for joining me this evening.